All right, welcome back. In case you're just joining us, it's time for our conversation right now. Ayodeji, who is the Managing Director of Afrinvest Securities Limited, is joining me right here at the table. Welcome to you, and thanks for joining me on today's show.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
We're looking at Nigeria's policy economic direction, isn't it? Let me start by asking you, give me one word for Nigeria's policy and economic direction right now. Nigeria's policy, investments, economic direction right now. Just give me one word. As an analyst, as you're looking at it, a policy, economy, investment, just one word?
I think it's a standstill. Seems like nothing is happening. Yeah, maybe there may be a lot of work being done, so not to slight maybe those really working hard on some of these policies, but I feel maybe the result it's maybe taking much time than we're expecting, and we feel that if the more we delay, because as long as we don't grow above the population growth rate, that means we are producing more people falling below the poverty level, which if you look at in terms of the medium to long-term risk, because when they don't have jobs, when they are idle, we look at the insecurity. And when you also link that, once there's insecurity, that would impact on investment, because whether it's domestic investment, foreign investment, we won't get as much as we're expected to receive that can boost employment. And that we don't expect. If it continues to linger this way, it's really going to tell really on Nigerians, and also in affecting our standard of living.
It's very interesting you brought out the security matter, because for me it's been what I've been pondering around for the last few weeks, and I'm really startled, I'm really disturbed with the security situation. You get to hear, like I said, was it 2 weeks ago or so, when I was being asked, I was like, and any news bulletin or any wherever, even on social media, what you just see is kill, die, people died, or it was kidnapped or something. You know, so for me, even going to the news now, surfing through news of the day, I'm always carrying my hat in my mouth, because you get to hear one sad news or the other. If police stray bullet doesn't shoot somebody, something is happening somewhere, and all of that. How do you think, even as an analyst watching all of this, how do you think all those things is really playing out with our economy in question? Because we are not just the only people experiencing, we are experiencing it in the country, but a lot of people are reading it around the world.
Yes, it's really pathetic, because if we look at the impact, especially in the north, you know, when we look at in terms of producing food crops, yes, inflation figure just came out, and food inflation also moderated, but you know, this is the harvest season, so you expect that that would impact, but not to be deceived or carried away with that. If this is not curtailed, the farmers, this is when they are supposed to also, when we get to the planting seasons, then there will be nothing to harvest. And you know, when you look at the food value chain, in terms of storage, we're nowhere close to, there's even nothing on ground. I know there's a lot of work being done within that space. So that will lead to significant increase in food prices, and that would further constrain the little disposable income that the populace are also trying to manage. And we look away from food and the issue of food. You also look at the investment. We need direct investment. We've seen that has declined significantly from a high of about $9 billion that we used to get received in 2011. Currently around, I think last year was about $2.2 billion. But when you also look at that $2.2 billion, there are just few transactions that are also responsible for that. So that means this is really telling that there's really a major challenge that we need to focus more on. And how we can be able to help with that is we may need to review the policy around enforcement of contracts. Beyond the insecurity, once investors are not guaranteed that the contract or agreement that would have been signed would be honored, then they will not have that confidence to invest. We are looking for investors for the refineries. There are a lot of back and forth that we've seen in terms of investment, privatized today, concession tomorrow. A lot of all those up and down sends very negative signal. So if we look away, you talked about insecurity, which is critical, especially what we're experiencing in the northern region. If nothing is done within that space, we may feel that for those in Lagos, they may feel a bit safe. But most times it escalates. Yeah, the killings,
the SARS stuff and all. You can just be going and someone just, you know, stops you for no just reason and all of that. Those are not too good signals.
It's really not too good signal, and that's why you've also seen that the brain drain. People are leaving the country
in droves right now, significantly,
and we may not see that impact now. But when you have the way it's been structured, for those that have the qualification, for those that are supposed to train the upcoming, leaving the country with what they have acquired, then when you look at it down the road in the next 2, 3, 4 years, then the quality of those that will be produced, whether in the financial service sector, whether in the manufacturing sector, will not be as robust as those that have learned from when they left the country. So it's really very pathetic if we look at it, when we look at in terms of the outlook, which calls for like an emergency that government needs to sit down to see what they want to do. Because if we continue to send this wrong signal, people will continue to look outside. And when you see those that are supposed to develop the economy, you have trained them, the medical doctors that is supposed to save lives, and they are leaving, and when they see their other colleagues that have left and they are doing very well, they don't bother about insecurity in terms of the standard of living, some of the in terms of some of the expenses that they have to incur here. Most places, school fees, primary level, secondary level, they don't incur all those expenses. So we would continue to lose some of these good hands if we are not really careful. And government, when you look at the budget, government, in terms of recurrent expenditure, constitute over 70%. And when you look at the number of employees in the government service, they are less than 10% of the population. So if you have less than 10% of the workforce spending over 70% of the budget, of the total
money meant for the country,
then that is very, we can't really progress with that. The little less than 30% that is left for capital expenditure, government is trying, because of its inability to attract private investment, government is trying to use that little to solve our problem. Infrastructure deficit, based on estimates, we require about $3 trillion. So in terms of even housing deficit, we require millions of dollars. So this 1.6 trillion that government intends to use to finance capital expenditure can be used as equity. That multiplier effect will be higher. So they have public-private partnership arrangements, which we feel we need to review. We've not seen currently a case, any major PPP arrangement that has really worked out, that people can even study, because for most of them at the middle of the arrangement, they either cancel the concession, withdraw the concession, review the concession. So some of these things needs to be looked at critically if actually we mean business and we want to grow beyond the 2% that we have estimated.
You've agreed that there should be a reset, isn't it?
Definitely.
That means that what we've seen in the last 4 years have not been working.
We can't continue like this. We've not seen results. There may be a lot of work to cut them on. There may be a lot of work that might have been done. Yes, moving from recession, out of recession, currently at the 2% levels. But we need to do more than that if our population is growing at 2.6%.
Wow. What would you want to see change, especially in the policy landscape?
Yeah, I think the first one that may be critical is to review policy that will attract private investment. So we want to look at it from different sectors. If we start from the petroleum, oil and gas sector, we know the PIB has been gathering dust. They've passed a part of it, but the governance part that would help in terms of shape the investment structure, there's still a lot to be done that. If they are able to see how they rejig that and that is passed, it will open up that sector. And if they also introduce clauses in terms of when contract agreements, so they may want to make those agreements so before you sign more rigorous, but once you know that you have signed with the government, no other government can come to reverse in the middle. You don't change the game in the middle of, you don't change the rules in the middle of the game. You look at also the power sector. The banks almost only funded the power sector in 2013 during the unbundling of the GENCOs and the DISCOs. But for most of the operators now, the prices are still controlled. From the gas that is supplying, controlling the price, also to the DISCOs in terms of the tariff that should be charged. You look at the MITO that was agreed, most of the exchange rate has changed, inflation has moved, growth rates, all those things were not applied. So the government have been indirectly subsidizing with all this intervention. Is also a form of subsidy. So they need to look at, if they want to undo the MAPS program, if we're hoping that that will go a very long way, so that we can have a cost-reflective tariff. So you release, in terms of the gas, you allow them to charge what market prices, and you also allow for the DISCOs to also charge what they can use to recoup in terms of their cost, because currently there's no bank that will be willing to lend to them. No foreign investors will be willing to come in, and they are just struggling and will continue to, we say bailout, which is like a subsidy, because when you charge below what market is charging, you also need to also pay them for them to remain in business. So when we also look at the consumer goods space as well as the industrial goods space, the cement industry, the ports, the port needs to, in terms of the time it takes to either export or import goods, it's very long. The costs, that adds to the pressure, adds to the cost, which is very significant. At the end of the day, the cost of those goods are not affordable to the average Nigerians. So we need to also look at that deliberately. So if we're able to look at some of those policies, smuggling is also a major issue that is affecting some of these companies. You can see their last, for their full year result for most of the companies, because of the issue of smuggling, they were not, most of them were not as profitable as they used to be. And if they continue to play in that space and they don't cover, currently they may not be covering their fixed and variable costs, but once it gets to a level where they can't cover their fixed costs, then they may be forced to shut down. That will lead to increase in unemployment. So if we look at those policies, they can't, government itself, I know maybe there are committees that might have been appointed looking at this thing, but we need to act fast. There are a lot of policies that are already been designed. There's the Economic Growth Recovery Plan.
ARGP.
So what I feel this government needs to look at is to accelerate its implementation. Just focus on implementation. It's not the time. Thankfully for them, it's like continuity. So they are not going back to the drawing board to start to reassess what policy should we implement. You have those policies. What can we do to accelerate the implementation of those policies such that we see the effect? The private sector, guys, when you dissect GDP, private sector contributes over 60% to GDP. We know a lot of focus have been on the government that contribute less than 10%. So what can we do to ensure that these private sector guys try, invest? You look at the investment aspect of it. If they are able to invest, then there will be employment. purchasing power would also increase, and all these companies were able to produce more. So I feel that looking away for the last 4 years, it's easier for them to look at what are some of those policies, what have we done. They may need to do like an assessment, what has been the impact of some of these policies. The little funds that we have, how can we use that to as equity contribution on some of these projects, and not necessarily fund all these projects, because you can't, if you are able to do like 20-30% contribution, whether you want them to build and operate and they transfer to you later. That's for most developed countries, that's what they do. You form the policies and you allow people that have the fund, let them build, operate it, and they pay you. Maybe after 10 years, they hand over those infrastructure to you.
With the current climate right now, also the body language of government, not just even this government, does it encourage that build, operate, and transfer kind of regime? Bearing in mind that we've seen some arrangement BOTs like that have gone awry. You know, I don't need to mention names, you know. Is there an encouragement for private sector to do that?
No, there's no encouragement. Even for domestic private investors, yes. No bank would, for most of the banks, they are very cautious now, learning from what happened to the power sector, that they lend to this advanced loans to that sector, and in terms of their projection was based on a certain price. Now government is coming back that they can't increase prices. So for the banks that should support major sector, they will think twice before they will advance loans to those sectors. And when you also look at the foreign investors, most of, like you rightly said, for some of the PPP arrangement that they had in the past, for most of them, in terms of the outcome, we have examples in Lagos.
So many
that
examples.
They had to cancel, buy out the private investor. But some of those things are sending very wrong signals. So for them now, it's other neighboring countries, African countries, that are enjoying those inflows. For most foreign investors, if they even have to invest, what they look at is, as long as that investment would be more than 3-4 years beyond your tenure, then they don't want to go into such kind of investment. And as a result, thinking of long-term projects that will have lasting impact would be missing.
Yes, and difficult for us.
Yeah.